Hello, my name's Andrew, and today we're going to be hanging out and talking about how to write the first chapter of a book. So if you're someone like me who's been procrastinating for like your entire life and you really want to write something, but it just seems like year after year after year, you just don't do anything about it, or you try to write something and then it's like crap and you just can't keep going and so you stop, this video is for you. I wrote a list today because I officially just finished my first chapter of the Sci-Fi series that I'm working on. I have about 5,700 words and I did it in a week. So yeah, super fresh at this moment. And I'm gonna talk about the 5 different components or the 5 different steps that I think that I had to take to get to this moment where I actually frickin' wrote something, you know? So the first step, honestly, is just like talent. Like either you have talent as a writer or you don't, and it's not something you can like measure on a scale. It's just something that you'll know from the time when you're a kid. Like, first of all, you just like writing, you know, like at some point you might kind of like feel that your creativity dries up and you don't write as much as you used to. But if you've never had a period in your life where you could just write and it just flowed, then you're probably not a writer. You know, you're probably someone who likes the idea of being a writer, but not the actual work. You know, you have to enjoy the work. If you don't enjoy the work, you're never going to be able to get through a page, let alone a chapter or a full book. But then there's also an external validation part of that. So like if no one has ever told you that they enjoy your writing, like the likelihood that you're gonna make a career in writing is very low. And I'm not talking about books here. I'm just talking about like maybe you wrote a letter to someone and they're like, wow, you know, like I really enjoyed reading that, something like that. Then also back to the first point, I think there has to be this deep knowledge within you that you can be the best in the world at something. Like I don't mean that you think that you're the best writer in the world and like everyone else is, you know, crap or whatever. But it's like there's some specific thing that you want to write about and you know that only you can write about it and it'll be better than anything that anyone else could do on that specific thing. Because if that's not true, then why would you even bother writing anything? And furthermore, like how could you possibly motivate yourself to write something if you know that there's someone out there that could do it better than you? For example, Stephen King might not be the best writer of all the time, but he's definitely the best horror writer of all time. So once you've ascertained that you do in fact have some talent at writing, the number 2 step that you have to take is figuring out what you want to write. This is, you know, the category, and there are lots of different categories, but one of the main ones I think that's really important is to figure out what type of writer you want to be. Like, do you want to be a one-off writer that writes like 40 different novels and most of them are like mediocre or crap, and then maybe they write one good novel that's a breakout? Or do you want to be the type of writer who just focuses like all in on one series, like J.K. Rowling, you know, where she just took Harry Potter, like this idea, and she just made it her entire life. You know, she wasn't writing really other stories other than just for fun to entertain herself. She wasn't trying to submit all of these different things to divide her energy up. You know, she just focused on that one thing, and that's what I wanted, honestly. I wanted to write a Harry Potter-like series where it just completely consumes your life. And then there are other categories you can think about, like fiction versus nonfiction. For me, I really wasn't interested in nonfiction. I wanted to write fantasy or sci-fi, so that was pretty easy for me. But then, of course, the next question was fantasy versus sci-fi, and this is one that kept me from writing for a long time. And I think other people struggle with it too, because they're like, what do I write? You know, this question of trying to figure out all of these things that you're interested in, like which one of them do you actually pick and focus your energy on? And there's the worry of like, what if I choose wrong? You know, so for years, I was just kind of stuck in this middle ground where I didn't know whether I wanted to write like medieval fantasy or some kind of sci-fi. So literally one day, I just decided to spend the whole day deciding whether I wanted to do fantasy or sci-fi with the series that I was writing on. Dun dun dun! This is what it is. Am I Fallout, sci-fi, or fantasy? And that might seem like a lot of time to spend on such a seemingly small question, but once you figure out that question, it has a lot of implications for the rest of your life. So I think it's worth taking some time to think about things like this. Once you generally know the type of book that you want to write, the third step that I took was creating this bucket where I started dumping all of my notes, all of my ideas. I used the app Notion. You can use whatever you want. You could use paper, you know, keep it in a folder, or if you like digital, you can do that. But I just like having this place where every time I come up with an idea, whether it's a plot point or a character or just like a feeling, or I don't know, like a name for some kind of blaster gun, I just put it into the file. And at first, it just feels like you've just got all this random crap that you don't know what to do with. But as you start collecting more things and as you start kind of like reading through this file over and over again and exposing yourself to your own ideas, you start to get a sense of like structure, and you see like, okay, here's this idea here, and I feel like it would be really cool if it was connected to this and like this plot point and this character, and then your brain starts like putting all of this stuff together. And the reason why it's important to have an actual like bucket, whether that's a journal or something digital, well, first of all, you can actually forget your ideas. Sometimes you can have a really good idea and then it's like gone if you don't write it down. But second of all, externalizing it and seeing it helps you make those connections that you're gonna need to write something really ambitious. The other nice thing about starting with notes versus actually like sitting down and trying to write 4 hours per day just like from nowhere, which I think is really hard and has never worked for me, is that it's so non-linear. So your brain is not really resistant to coming up with little tiny ideas versus working on something for 4 hours and having to organize and focus just out of nowhere. And over time, this bucket will just start to fill up and up and up, and it'll get to a certain point where something just like snaps, something clicks into place, and you realize that you have enough to move forward. And that's step number 4. Step number 4 is just like life in general, your life experience, like what you have gone through. And, honestly, when people are younger, they just don't have enough life experience to write something really interesting, especially something epic, like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, where it requires like all of these different life experiences that you weave together into this really epic tale. Obviously, when you're younger, you can do things that are a little bit more like narrow, where you're only writing about maybe like kids or, something like that you have a lot of experience in. But at the end of the day, it's kind of about suffering, because in order to write something, you have to have this burning desire in you, both to create something positive and to move away from something negative, So if you're growing up and you're in a suburb and you have a happy home life and you're not wanting for much of anything, you're gonna have a really hard time writing something worthwhile. But if you have been struggling, with, chronic health problems, with loneliness, with mental health issues for a long time, and it just, the stress just builds up, then you finally reach a point where you can write, especially if you've been dropping all of your ideas into a file. And for me, like, if I could describe it, I think it was the moment of realizing that in some ways it just felt like I was incompatible with reality. I think that's important because there has to be something that you need desperately from this book, from writing this book, that you just can't get in the real world. Or it's so difficult to get that it's going to take you decades, and you have kind of like a good way to explain it is like if you've ever played the game The Sims. It's where you sort of manage these like virtual people, and they have levels for everything, from like their bathroom level of like needing to go to the bathroom to like love, and let's say they're lonely, and so their like loneliness level will go down, down, down until it gets into the red, and then like you can't even control them anymore. They're just like so desperate, and they just like need this thing so badly that they won't listen to you. And that's kind of like the moment that I ran into. Like, they're just things that I needed so badly, like just like friendships and relationships, sense of adventure, that like I'm working on these things, but they're like so far away, and I've like failed so many times to attain them in the real world that I just realized that I had to start writing, otherwise I was going to go insane. However, the suffering is kind of like only half of the life equation, because there are a lot of people that really suffer and are really miserable, but they just can't do anything about it. And one of the reasons for that, actually probably the only or the main reason for that, is that you just don't have enough energy. People don't have enough energy to express this sorrow or this longing that they have. And generally the main reason for that is because of the food. Lifestyle, how much you're exercising, are you getting outside for vitamin D, and all that, are you getting enough sleep at night? All of that is really important, but diet is just so huge for creative people. And I feel like this is something that is just not talked about. And when it is talked about, it's not right, or at least it's not right, for each individual person. And that's the hard thing about figuring out what diet to be on is that like no one can tell you the one, perfect diet for creativity. You just have to experiment for years, kind of in the same way that I was talking about with the notes file. You just need to keep trying different foods and combinations of food, and eventually just kind of like you have that insight, with the suffering or the longing for something, something will snap into place and it'll just all work. Like for me, the past 4 months, I've been eating this raw primal diet with raw meat and raw dairy, raw egg yolks. And, it's really weird. And some people think it's crazy or they disagree with it, whatever, but the results speak for themselves. Like in the past week, I've written 5,700 words. And this is after literally decades of not being able to write, being depressed, being anxious, ADHD, couldn't focus. And finally, like things just click into place. So I'm not saying that it'll be a raw primal diet for everyone, but it's just important to keep an open mind and always be experimenting and listening to yourself and your energy, because if you're not on the right diet, then you literally don't have enough energy to write anything meaningful. All right, so step number 5 in writing the first chapter of a book is the system that you're going to use. And honestly, it's not even that important. Like once you get to step 4 and you reach that moment where you've suffered enough and where you're on the diet that's providing you the energy to do something about it, it'll kind of just come naturally, which is what happened to me. Like I just sort of knew that it was time to start writing. I had one of those moments where I had suffered enough, and I was ready for the story to start unfolding itself. I had taken enough notes, etc. But I just decided that I wanted to write 1,000 words a day. And the first day I wrote about 500 words. And then at that point, like it felt really good, but I wasn't sure if I was going to stick with it. And then the next day I wrote 1,100 words, and then I wrote 1,400 words. And then today I wrote 1,300 words. And then suddenly I have a chapter. My only real advice is probably writing in the morning, or at least writing when your energy is highest. I think for a lot of people that should be the morning, because if you've gone through your entire day, you are more likely to be exhausting. But I'm not going to tell anyone, just like I'm not going to tell anyone what diet to eat. Like you just kind of have to figure it out for yourself. But like I said, once you reach that moment, it'll just sort of naturally sort itself out in terms of what feels good for you writing. However, I will say the one thing I like about writing 1,000 words a day, which for me is usually about 3 to 4 hours of writing in the morning, is that you'll have 30,000 words in a month. And if you just keep that up consistently, it's really easy to reach your goal of finishing your book. Like when I did my first book, 365 Comics, I just drew a comic every single day. And, it was guaranteed that I was gonna have a book of 365 comics when I was done at the end of the year. So yeah, that's my advice on how to write the first chapter of a book. But if you're working on a project or you're trying to work on a project, I'd love to hear about it, and let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. Catch you next time. Peace.